So without further ado, let's get started. And I'd like to get started with a bit of background on what's been going on at Hay Group. At Hay Group, we've taken 60 years of research and experience and channeled it into a suite of powerful yet cost-effective tools that will help you find, reward, and develop talent within your organization, all the while maximizing the return on investment in your people. We call this suite of tools the Atrium, and there are 3 zones within it, which you can see on your screen now. So today's webinar is actually going to focus on the talent zone with specific attention to emotional intelligence. And Hay Group's model of emotional intelligence is the backbone of our approach to talent development. Through a partnership with Daniel Goleman and Richard Boyatzis, we have created the Emotional and Social Competency Inventory, or ESCI as we like to call it. While many EI assessments exist in the market, the ESCI is the only one developed by Goleman, Boyatzis, and Hay Group. As such, it is one of the most validated behavioral measures of emotional and social intelligence. And the ESCI measures behaviors, which enables you to assess, develop, and coach your leaders. The tool is also very widely used globally. Clients use it across job levels and industries, and from nonprofits to Fortune 500 companies. And to date, we have almost 250,000 ESCI assessments processed. Just to give you a little rundown of our agenda this morning, we'll start today's webinar with an introduction to the concept of EI and how we at Hay Group define it. Then we'll discuss how pertinent it is for today's leaders in the ever-changing business landscape. Next, we'll focus on answering the question, can EI be developed, which is obviously very important. We'll then take a closer look at the tool as well as the report output associated with it. We'll switch our focus next to the ROI on developing EI and what that can be. Instituting EI as part of your leadership development program is great, but how does it affect your bottom line results? Finally, we'll finish with a Q&A period to field any questions you may have. I'd just like to start off with a quick poll question, and if you could just please rate your familiarity with emotional intelligence on your screen. So you can either mark very familiar, a little familiar, or not familiar at all. Like most of you have at least some familiarity with EI. For those of you who don't, we hope this webinar will provide a great first experience with the concepts of emotional intelligence. And for those of you who are, we hope that we can answer any questions you may have and provide a bit more insight into Hay Group's expertise in this area. So I'd now like to introduce my colleague, Ginny Flynn. Ginny has been with Hay Group for almost 17 years. Her responsibilities include managing the talent team in Boston, overseeing accreditations for the United States, and managing the ongoing account management and delivery of Hay Group's talent solutions. So, Ginny, you can take it away.
Great. Thanks, Zach. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am so pleased to be here today to discuss emotional intelligence and specifically its importance to leaders within organizations. Let's face it, we live in uncertain, to say the very least, times, what with economic, the state of the economy both at home and elsewhere, political upheaval, what have you. It's really never been more critical for us to be able to manage our emotions. As Zach mentioned, I've been with Hay Group about 17 years, and I manage the team responsible for the leadership and talent products and accreditation programs that we offer. We count among our clientele clients from all industries, pharma, manufacturing, retail, finance, what have you, and work with both people in the not-for-profit as well as for-profit areas. Over my 17 years with Hay Group, I have had the distinct pleasure of working with colleagues, both Hay Group, within Hay Group and beyond, who are basically thought leaders in their respective areas. And Zach has already mentioned 2 of them, Daniel Goleman and Richard Boyatzis, in regards to the emotional intelligence piece. Through those partnerships, we've been able to create and then distribute research-based products which are practical and impactful. So very, very pleased to be here today. As we move on, let's first take a look at what is emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman defines emotional intelligence, as we see here, as the capacity for recognizing our own feelings and those of others, for motivating ourselves, for managing emotions well in ourselves and our relationships. Now, let me just say there are many definitions out there, but this is the one to which we subscribe, and it's the one on which our tool, the Emotional and Social Competency Inventory, is based. I will say that while Daniel did not coin the term emotional intelligence, he did popularize it back in 1995 with his book, his best-selling book, Emotional Intelligence. In that book, he really made the concept of emotional intelligence accessible to all with his easy-to-read style and his really great use of stories. In looking at the framework, I think it is important to look at where this concept came from. And while we are building on specifically the work of Daniel Goleman and Richard Boyatzis, who I might mention actually, were both students of David McClelland. And David McClelland is the person for whom our own Hay Group Center, McClelland Center for Research, is named. They were both students of his, studied under him, and in their own right continued to work on the research he began back in the 70s in regards to competency assessment and looking at what distinguishes outstanding from average performers. In their own rights, they have continued to do their own research and are authors of books. We've already mentioned Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence, which was then followed up with in 1998 by Working with Emotional Intelligence, where his focus was on specifically the importance of emotional intelligence within organizations and for leaders specifically. Richard Boyatzis is actually a professor at Case Western Reserve University and has authored The Competent Manager as well as Resident Leadership. Aside from these colleagues that we have worked with in regards to our own tool, I will say that the concepts predate even them. E.L. Thorndike, for instance, identified back in the 20s the concept of social intelligence, while Howard Gardner, back in the early 80s, introduced his theory of multiple intelligence. So what you see today in terms of emotional and social intelligence as we present it takes into account their groundbreaking work as well. In looking at the competency framework, it's these 4 quadrants or clusters that Daniel Goleman first introduced in regards to his model of emotional intelligence, and it's the one that we've built on for the purposes of our tool. The framework consists of these 4 clusters, is what I'll refer to them as. Self-awareness, which is basically the ability to recognize what we are feeling and why we are feeling that way. Our ability to identify our own strengths and weaknesses, for instance. Self-management, our ability to manage those emotions based on recognizing that certain things have an ability to maybe make us a little crazy. How capable are we or not of actually managing those? Social awareness, the ability to sense others' feelings and perspectives, despite what they might be saying. Can we see what it is that they're really feeling? And in the final quadrant, relationship management, where we actually see the impact on the motivation of others. The model consists, as I say, of these 4 clusters, and within our tool, we're assessing competencies within each of those clusters. In the first cluster, there is just one competency. It's emotional self-awareness. In the second cluster, which is self-management, there are actually 4 competencies being assessed, 2 of which are specific to how well we manage ourselves, the other 2 specific to how well we motivate ourselves. Those competencies are emotional self-control, adaptability, achievement orientation, and positive outlook. In the third cluster, there are 2 competencies being assessed. One is empathy, how well we're actually able to sense others' feelings and actually take an active interest in their concerns. And organizational awareness, one that's more focused at groups of people or networks of people. How capable are we of assessing those power players, key players, any cues in the environment in regards to what relationships exist, networks exist, people that we need to influence. And in the final cluster, which is relationship management, there are actually a number of the most actually competencies in the model, which include conflict management, coach and mentor, influence, inspirational leadership, and teamwork. Now, I think we're going to take a moment here, if I'm not mistaken, to actually poll again and ask you, of those 4 clusters that I've just introduced, which do you feel is most directly linked to leadership performance? Okay, it looks like everyone's completed that poll question, and the majority of you have chosen relationship management, followed by self-awareness, but the vast majority have said relationship management. And I think that I can see why you would have chosen relationship management, especially given the model that we presented on the previous slide, which showed an arrow leading out from relationship management, speaking to performance and positive impact on others. But what I want to do is step back for a moment and actually focus on why that is, why we see the impact coming out of the relationship management cluster. In this model, and our research shows and supports this time and time again, it's actually the self-awareness cluster that is the heart, if you will, of the model. Without self-awareness, it is virtually impossible for someone to self-manage. And again, our research has shown that time and time again. Basically, without knowing what it is you're feeling, it is almost impossible to manage it. If you don't know, for instance, that a particular person or situation is likely to set you off, you have no chance to put into play any type of mechanisms to prepare you for that situation. You would not know to take that deep breath prior to responding to the person or situation. You wouldn't know to make time for yourself to step away and get a better perspective prior to responding. You would simply be pretty much at the mercy of those emotions. Likewise, if you are not self-aware, you stand virtually no chance of being socially aware. In general, without that self-awareness, you are too caught up in your own emotions to actually be present for others. So it's actually having that self-awareness, which allows you to self-manage and be socially aware. And it's then that self-management and social awareness that allows you to manage your relationships well, to provide the direction, energy, and restraint that make it possible to perform well in that relationship management cluster. Okay, I thought that it might be important to provide a little bit of context in regards to where EI sits within Hay Group's leadership framework. And with this graphic, I think I will actually read from right to left. So start with the results and work back to try to explain this framework to you. In general, we are all responsible for results. And in looking at how we best deliver on results, our research has shown that leaders, by creating, motivating, engaging, very well-articulated strategies included type climates, have the best impact on results. Let me step back. We have found in our research that organizational climate, which is what we describe as how it feels to work here, how motivated or not I am to give of my discretionary effort, and how well or not I understand how my efforts are aligned with the organizational goals, ultimately impact on results. So if we believe that, and we know, as based on our research, that about 30% of variance in financial results can be explained by differences in climate, then the next likely question is, okay, so what do we do to create the best climates we can? Our research also shows that about 50 to 70% of variance in climate can be explained by differences in leadership styles. So what does that mean? It means if you take a look at the leaders in your organization and the choices they're making about how they lead their people, and assessing what it is that they're doing, what type of flexibility they're allowing their people, what type of direction they're giving their people, what amount of coaching and mentoring and capability building they're focusing on for their people. When you look at that, you're able to determine, where within the organization leaders are actually having a positive impact on the climate that's created for their team, and where perhaps they're not having that positive impact. The emotional intelligence piece actually informs, if you will, what styles leaders choose to use with their people, and how appropriate or not those choices are. Because while there are many styles of leadership, and some more effective than others, each style can be effective if used with the right person in the right situation. And we would say that emotional intelligence, being self-aware, socially aware, being able to self-manage and relationship manage, helps a manager or leader, to make the right choice in regards to the styles he or she uses with their people, their team, to have the best impact on climate and ultimately the best impact on results.
And so I think what Ginny's really saying, and I think it rings true, is that it really starts with EI, and it starts with emotional intelligence. And, as I said, it's just kind of reiterating the backbone of our leadership development framework here at Hay Group.
Absolutely. Okay, we talked a minute ago about results, something we're all accountable for, so thought it might be helpful just to provide some information in regards to these EI competencies and what we have found, what we and others have found. And in the first quote we have here, it talks to a study of 300 top-level executives from 15 global companies that showed that 85 to 90% of leadership success was linked to social and emotional intelligence. In the next case, in a multinational study of 515 senior executives, EI scores were high in 74% of successful hires, but only high in 24% of failed hires. And in the final example, schools whose head teachers have high EI scores demonstrated the best national inspection results. And that final one was actually from our colleagues in the UK. So again, definitely showing results, making a difference, having these competencies do count. In regards to bottom line performance, as we continue on, again with the results focus, we have found in our research that in most complex jobs, the top performer is 127% more productive than an average performer. That's pretty impressive. And competency research in over 200 organizations worldwide attribute to about a third of the difference in technical and cognitive ability, but two-thirds to emotional competence. In terms of making sales, which for many of us is the result we're looking for, we found that at L'Oreal, sales professionals with high EI scores sold in excess of $90,000 more than their lower scoring peers. And in terms of a high-scoring consulting partner, when we looked at comparing consulting partners within organizations, we found that a high-scoring partner delivered $1.2 million more profit than from their accounts than their peers. So all impressive results. But to speak to the fact that these results do span sectors, we have a nursing example here as well. An example where we found that nurses and nurse managers with higher EI scores were responsible for lower staff turnover, higher frequency of professional practice behaviors, and higher staff, patient, and doctor satisfaction. And that last bullet is pretty amazing, that the satisfaction scores were higher across the board for all constituents, basically. Okay, and in manufacturing, we also found that supervisors in manufacturing who had received training in emotional competencies, basically how to listen better and help employees resolve problems, what have you, had lost time accidents reduced by 50%. Formal grievances were also reduced by 15 to 3 per year, and the plant exceeded productivity goals by 250,000. Okay, well, getting results is obviously important. So we move on now to why is EI so important for today's leaders. And there are a number of reasons why it would be important to leaders within organizations. Many of these listed here on this slide we can personally relate to. I know I can. Whether you're experiencing change because of a merger or acquisition, or because your existing organization has had to change its strategy simply to remain competitive, as a leader, you need to communicate the need for change and get people on board with it as soon as possible. You also need to, in most cases, articulate and enable behavior change. So what is it that your team needs to do differently? Your team will need to know this, and they will need the resources and support in order to make these behavior changes. So across the board, I think the basic message is that you simply need to do more with less. And at this point, I feel pretty confident that I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. Oftentimes people will ask when we're talking about emotional intelligence, are you saying that IQ or more traditional definitions of smarts don't matter? And no, we're absolutely not saying that. IQ is important, absolutely. Things like your degrees, your experience, your skills. These are things that are very important. They will basically get you in the door. They're the cost of entry. However, once you are in the door, we find that the things that distinguish the superior performers aren't the how many degrees they have, where they went to school, what type of education they've had per se. It's more these things that we call social and emotional intelligence. These are the things that actually differentiate performance. When we ask clients to describe their star performers, they rarely, if ever, mention how smart they are. They always mention things like, this person can read and relate to all kinds of people. This person is always looking for ways to improve processes and products. This person is able to make the most of even the worst situation, and this person can easily change gears or their approach if need be. These are what distinguish. And I just asked you if they sound familiar to you in terms of how you would describe those star performers within your organization. And it's at this point that we actually have another polling question, and we're going to ask you, who would you work best for, Boss A or Boss B? We've got characteristics listed here for both, so go ahead and let us know who you'd work best for. Well, that was an easy one, right? Boss A. Boss A, the great listener, the person who encourages me, the person with whom I can communicate very easily, the person that stands up for me and goes to bat for me within the organization, that champions our team, the person who has a sense of humor and shows empathy to me and others on the team, the person who can take action and take responsibility for that action, but is humble in regards to his or her achievements, and sure as hell doesn't take credit for those things that I or others on the team have contributed. So it's really no surprise that the majority of you would work best for that type of boss. And the one thing I'd say before we move on is that if you haven't already made the connections between those characteristics and the competencies found within the model that we discussed earlier, it's pretty easy to map those characteristics to those competencies that we are specifically measuring within the emotional and social competency inventory. So the next question is, can EI be developed? And I think Zach touched on this early on in terms of the fact that this is a behavioral measure, and behaviors absolutely can be developed, and that's the beauty of the model, I think. And clearly, good intentions aren't enough. I don't think Boss B set out to be Boss B. He or she did not want to be a bad boss or someone that didn't bring out the best in you. But oftentimes, despite our best intentions, that's what we do. And it's here that we get to really that whole intention versus perception question. So what I intend may be very different than how I am perceived by those people I lead. And ultimately, it's their perception that is most important. And it's the 360 feedback that allows people to get feedback in regards to their behavior and the impact that it's having on the people they lead. Now just to take a look at how the ESCI is used. In general, we find that it is most valuable when it's used for development purposes. And that's specifically how the tool has been designed and how we train people to actually coach folks that are receiving feedback with the tool. We are very specific in our advice, recommendations, instructions, what have you, that the ESCI should not be used for selection or downsizing purposes. At its most valuable, it is used not with problem children within organizations, but the people that you want to invest in and support in their development. And I will say this, in general, we have found that the people who really improve their emotional intelligence have some not so surprising things in common. Basically, they don't bite off more than they can chew. They focus on 2 or 3, maybe, competencies initially that they want to work on. They articulate exactly what success is going to look like so that they know what it is they ultimately will have accomplished if they improve on a particular competency. They also leverage their strengths. While some of us, I would tend to think maybe the majority of us, tend to focus initially on our weaknesses. We open up a report and we look at our lowest scores and we think, oh my God, that's what I need to focus on. That's what I need to develop. I need to improve that score. But we find that the people that really improve the most take a look at the strengths as well and look at opportunities to leverage those strengths for their ultimate improvement. And the final item is they actively seek ongoing feedback. This is not a one-time deal. They do not get feedback and leave it at that. They return. They ask additional people for feedback. Perhaps they go back to people that have provided feedback previously and ask for more detail, or ask if the person has actually seen any improvement based on development attempts made thus far. So basically the 360 piece is critical, and I'm going to turn this over to Zach so that he can actually show you the emotional and social competency inventory in terms of the feedback it provides.
Thanks, Jenny. And what I'm going to do now is take you through the feedback report of the emotional and social competency inventory. After the survey has been completed, what does the report look like? What does the participant see? What do you as the coach see? So within the ESCI, there are 5 main sections. And the ESCI is a 360 tool. And by 360, we mean that there's data that's collected across a broad spectrum of working relationships. And the standard rater categories included in the ESCI are self, manager, direct reports, peers, client customer, as well as an all-encompassing other category. So the first section, the first section, the data validity section, which we'll go into in a second, really just outlines where is the data coming from. As you can see here, there was a manager, direct reports, a group of direct reports, and peers that were asked to complete the survey. In addition to how many were distributed, you can see how many were received and ultimately processed for the report. There are also scales of agreement by rater category as well as familiarity with the participant. So the first section of data that we come to in the ESCI is called the summary section. And what you'll notice is the data goes from a very high-level overview to a smaller and smaller view, and eventually a view by item or question. But we'll start here. We'll start with the summary section. And it provides an overview of the strengths and weaknesses of each competency, as well as perception versus intent. So by that I mean there are a few different scales for each competency. The participant is mapped against the total others, what we define as total others, which are all rater categories besides the self category. And that's also mapped against our norm for each competency. So this can help you by showing which competencies overall in this model are considered strong and which ones could use improvement. And after factoring current job requirements and future goals, this provides very useful working on a development plan with a participant. So the next section, the competency detail section. The competency detail section is similar to the summary section, but breaks the competency data out a little bit more. In this view, the data is shown by competency broken out by the various rater categories. So whereas in the last category you saw an overall score for each competency, now you're seeing that score broken out by each rater category.
Yeah, I always like this report section, Zach, in talking with folks about how well they might be managing certain categories. So, for instance, you might see someone who's managing up very well. The scores from the manager are very high, but they're not doing so well with the direct reports, and that's a good talking point in the development with this individual to know where those differences by rater category actually exist.
Absolutely. And just to go back for a second, I don't mean to go back here, but just to explain a little bit further, with the summary section, the white dot is the self-rating. The blue bar that you see there, that is the total others, which I said is all rater categories aggregated other than the self score. And then that outlined box that you see is actually the norm score for each competency. So moving kind of inwards, if you will, the last section that we have is called the item frequency distribution, the item frequency section. And the item frequency distribution, like the competency detail section, breaks the data out by rater groups. However, in this view, aggregated responses are shown to individual items, what we refer to as items, or questions, if you will, rather than competencies. The items are all still grouped by competency, so you can see which items are associated with which competencies. So, for instance, here there are two items that are described, able to describe how own feelings affect own actions, and describes underlying reasons for own feelings. And we can see that those are both part of the emotional self-awareness competency. And we tend to use this and position this as a reference more than anything else. It's not necessarily a section that should be, can be, or needs to be read from start to finish, but it can provide some very useful information in explaining how a particular competency score or rater category competency score was arrived at. Would you agree, Jenny?
Yeah, absolutely, Zach. I actually only go to this section when I'm coaching someone who is confused about the score they got. They just can't understand it. Where is that coming from? Is something I'll hear them saying, and that's when I bring them to this section and say, okay, let's revisit the definition. Let's look at the items that people were actually asked to complete, and let's see if we can make sense of it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So in addition to the item frequency distribution section, there are verbatim comments, and the verbatim comments allow raters as well as the participant to reflect on strengths as well as areas for development within the ESCI. So that really allows the participant and allows the coach as well to contextualize some of the data that has been presented. So there are other options at Hague Group. We do feel that the ESCI 360 is the most valuable in terms of feedback and development opportunities. But we do have a host of other options that can help you introduce or use in conjunction with the ESCI 360. If you would like to have any additional information on these supplemental materials, you can definitely reach out to us, and we can provide samples and pricing as well around those. And I'll hand it back over to Ginny now, and she will talk about the ROI of developing emotional intelligence.
Okay, thanks, Zach. Earlier we gave some information in regards to results, actual results that we have seen based on people making some type of investment in assessing and developing emotional and social intelligence. Here we have just a look at the fact that it is important across jobs, regardless of level within organization or complexity of job, what have you, but it's most important at the high level and more complex jobs. We touched on this particular statistic or finding earlier in terms of the added value generated by the top 1% in high complexity jobs was 127% greater than the average. Now that's huge, and as I said, it becomes even more critical with those high complex and higher level jobs. But even at the medium and low complexity level, the percentage differences in regards to the folks in the top 1% being more productive are still very compelling. We have a case study here that speaks to work that we did with a global law firm in regards to helping them develop emotional and social intelligence in their partners. And the slides provide a little bit of information in that regard, and you will be getting a copy of this deck. But I do want to just mention that the partners with higher EI did not necessarily produce more revenue personally. What they did, however, was they were responsible for teams that ultimately produced more revenue. And when building capability within your group and having an impact as a team is important, this particular case speaks to just that in terms of an outcome. So we've also provided some client testimonials here in regards to the product and the actual accreditation program associated with it, but we do want to make sure that we leave some time for questions. We had one final
question that came in about how to access the tool. And there are a few ways that you can access the tool. We do every once in a while, or every couple of months, we do on accreditations in our Boston office, as well as sometimes throughout the United States and across the world, really.
Yeah, we offer public programs that, as an individual, people can register to attend. But oftentimes, we're also asked by client organizations to come on site and provide accreditation to a group of people within the organization, and we're happy to do other to do either, accommodate individuals that want to sign up for public programs or come and deliver programs to client organizations. And Zach's looking at additional questions that have come in. I think I actually saw one in regards to the norm population associated with the ESCI. It was, as some of you recall, it was the box that was on the summary part of the report, and someone asked, what does that refer to? Well, the norm population consists of over 4,000 individual participants that were assessed, and there 40-odd thousand people who rated them. So what it does is and I will say that's across, I think, about 270 organizations. So what that does is give you a frame of reference for your score, how you compare to that population, and the box actually reflects the 25th to 75th percentile, which means basically average. So your placement of your score, either the total other score or your self-score in relation to that box, tells you whether you are at, above, or below average.
We've had another question come in that asks, does the ESCI report summarize results by reporting an emotional intelligence percentile overall in the separate 4 quadrants? No,
there's not an overall score. The scores are by competency. And again, the frame of reference provided so that you know, well, what does that mean? How do I compare to others? What is my frame of reference? Is in regards to that norm population. The other piece within the report that speaks to, how well have I scored is there's actually a strength arrow as well that will appear by competency on the report in those cases where someone has scored at 85% of scale. This particular instrument is a 5-point scale, so 85% would mean a score of 4.3 or higher, which means that the person is showing that competency at somewhere between often and consistently.
Another question asks about ballpark pricing for the administration of the ESCI, and per participant, it ranges from $175 to $225.
Yeah, it actually depends on how you want to administer the surveys. We offer a couple of options. For those people that have plenty of resources in-house and have made use of other self-service options, what have you, we do offer a site at which people can administer the surveys for themselves. It keeps the costs down and allows basically 24/7 access to the system so that they can administer anytime they'd like. But for those people that don't have resources internally to rely on, we also offer a full service option. So we would take all of that on for you, provide you with a dedicated representative to manage that process for you, and that's at the higher end of the range.
Another question asks about the correlation between emotional intelligence and mentoring, and if there's any research on this in this area. Now, one of the competencies that Ginny mentioned is coach and mentor, and maybe Ginny can speak a little bit to what that means. Ginny, do you want to field that?
Well, I don't know that we've done research specifically to come up with correlations between them, but as Zach mentioned, it is specifically one of the competencies found within the relationship management cluster.
We've had another question come in about how this is different than some of the other, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, there are a lot of, EI assessments out there, and what makes Hay Group's ESCI, the Emotional and Social Competency Inventory, different from those?
Yeah, I think that, if you do a Google search or any kind of search in regards to emotional intelligence, there are quite a few out there. Some, more reliable and valid than others. But for those that I know of that are quite good, their approach typically tends to be a little different. So, for instance, I believe the Baron assessment is very personality focused, and personality in our minds is pretty fixed and a little more difficult to change. And the thing that we mentioned earlier about the ESCI is that with its behavioral approach, we feel most strongly that because behaviors can be observed, because behaviors can be actually changed, developed, what have you, it's the much more helpful and practical approach.